That sucks. All right. So we're just going to be using these notes here, straight off the Pearson. All right, so first up, what you're going to see in the slide is where the fibers come out, where they do not mix. Okay, so notice those top three cranial nerves that we mentioned, 3, 7, and 9, serving some of the glands here in the head. But vagus, coming off the brainstem right there, is going to be touching all these organs, except for the reproductive organs here, which are served by what? The sacral nerves. That's parasympathetic. Sympathetic, a little more straightforward. We have to go through this sympathetic chain to get anywhere in the sympathetic flow. So the purpose of the PowerPoint now is really more so of a review. We've covered all the basic terms here, but let me point out some specifics. This right here, the fact that autonomics control what? Innervation 2, smooth and cardiac muscle, glands, blood vessels, and of course organs. If you want to write organs in there, that would be great. Also, the fact that they must pass through a ganglia to reach their effector is essential for you guys to know. Right here, they must pass through a ganglia before they reach their effector. Does everyone understand what the effector would be? The effector is the organ that it's trying to get to. So whether it's a gland or a blood vessel or whatever, the effector is where it's going to. Okay, the structure of it here, like we mentioned before, in the somatic world, it's one motor neuron from the spinal cord to the muscle, like we did in our reflex loop, let's say. But in all autonomics require two motor neurons, a preganglionic and a postganglionic. So this notation here on the bottom, which ones are myelinated? The preganglionic neurons are myelinated, as well as all somatic nerves, which are the ones that go to the skeletal muscle. The postganglionic nerves for the autonomics are unmyelinated. Okay, next up, this gives you the idea of the neurotransmitters used. Where is acetylcholine used? All somatics, going to skeletal muscle, but in the parasympathetic world, it's also used at the pre- and postganglionic neurons. So there's two ways to remember this. You can either just know that all preganglionic neurons use acetylcholine, and that for the postganglionics, it switches to norepinephrine for the sympathetics. Or you can just know that everything parasympathetic uses acetylcholine, period. That may be one easy way to learn it. And just know that for sympathetic, the only place norepinephrine is used is at the level of the organ, on the postganglionic side. So whichever way works for you. And what was the term we used to describe a neuron using acetylcholine? Cholinergic. What about a neuron that uses norepinephrine? Adrenergic, right? Excellent. They're getting that word from the fact that epinephrine and norepinephrine, right? These are two chemicals here that are very structurally related. They're a very minor difference between the two. This is the same thing as saying adrenaline or noradrenaline. Everyone knows about adrenaline. What does it do? Speeds up gets our body all revved up, right? Well, adrenaline sounds a lot like adrenal, doesn't it? So the adrenal gland is where these come from. Epinephrine, which is adrenaline, comes from the adrenal gland. Where's the adrenal gland? It's on top of the kidney. If the kidney is renal, right? Something that we're adding to the kidney is adrenal, which is the adrenal gland that sits on top of the kidney, kind of looking like a party hat. Okay, so some more pictures just to describe the same old thing. The top picture describes us looking at any autonomic ganglion is what we need to get a preganglionic and postganglionic neuron connected to reach any kind of viscera. Whereas somatics just use one neuron, there is no ganglion. So please note that anytime you want to get to an organ, you have to pass through a ganglia. That's the statement that I'm trying to push across, okay? But also, anytime I say the word anytime, means that there's an exception, right? And the exception is our good friend, the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland does not require a ganglion to be used on its pathway. The adrenal gland gets direct influence from the sympathetic fibers directly to the gland. There is no ganglia needed. So we'll see that coming up. Right here. There's the adrenal gland, right? Do you see a ganglion? No. It takes the sympathetic preganglionic neuron straight to the adrenal gland. Then what's it going to stimulate? The release of adrenaline, epinephrine, or norepinephrine, right? Which is what drives your body into a faster state, drives your physiology a little bit faster, especially the heart. Increases heart rate, increases cardiac output, increases stroke volume, increases blood pressure, right? Increases preload, increases a whole lot of things that you're going to study in A&P 2. All right, look at the simple facto of the picture. Here's the ganglia used in sympathetic, right? The preganglionic is short, the postganglionic is longer. On the parasympathetic side, it's backwards. The preganglionic is longer, the postganglionic is shorter. So those are the kind of specifics we saw from the notes on the board. And please know that for the test. This also has the neurotransmitter. So if you want to learn the whole chapter, basically, learn this picture really, really well. It tells you everything. It tells you the ganglia, right, where they're placed, the neurons, and it tells you the neurotransmitters. So which, again, neurotransmitter do you use in the sympathetic division to get to the organ? To get to the organ. Norepinephrine. Right. Acetylcholine is only used at the ganglia in the sympathetic world. Okay, so make sure you review that. The next step would be knowing all the effects. So the limiting factor here is whether we're increasing digestive capability or inhibiting digestive capability. Which one of these systems would increase digestion? Parasympathetic, absolutely. Which means that sympathetic would inhibit digestion. So if you're all stressed out, right, fully stressed every day, are you able to digest food very well? No. Do you still digest food? Yes, but in an irritated fashion. You need parasympathetic flow to correctly have the intestines and GI tract as a whole work. That's why you're not supposed to eat big meals when you're all stressed out, right? Okay, good. So anything we have digestively going on, which includes the motility of food through the tract and glandular secretions in any way, best case scenario is to have parasympathetic nerves feeding all that happening correctly. Anything that we want to do to manage stress, to help the body deal with extreme situations, is going to be sympathetic flow. So as an example, where would we want to promote blood flow to, sympathetically? To the GI tract or to the arms and legs? Sympathetic is all about fight or flight, so we want to give all blood possible to arms and legs, right? For fighting or flighting. All right, we still give blood to the heart, no doubt about that. There's still blood going to the colon. That can't stop. I'm just saying more blood will be sent to the extremities in this case. If you had no blood, let's say we flipped it around, if we took blood from the extremities and carried it more so into the colon, what would that do to your arms and legs? What does blood have in it that's so valuable?
Oxygen.
Oxygen. Without oxygen in the muscle, what do we get? Fatigue, right? Without glucose going into the muscle, which is also part of the blood, you get no ATP. So with no energy and no oxygen, you don't have a shot if you're being chased by a lion, do you? You'll just become lunch real fast. Or a snack, I guess. Yeah. Okay, so that's what we're going to see coming up. So let's do it. Under sympathetic flow, on the right side of this picture, we see pupils being dilated, anything digestive being inhibited, right, which includes saliva production. So when you're nervous, anxious, is your mouth dry? Yes, it can get dry, right? Accelerate heartbeat? Absolutely. Dilate bronchi? What's the significance of dilating the bronchi? Increase more airflow, more air exchange. You're going to get this in respiratory system. More oxygen availability, right, coming in. We're going to inhibit movement of the colon, which is peristalsis. We convert glycogen to glucose. What is glycogen? It's the storage form of glucose, right? So we're mobilizing glucose. We're increasing blood glucose levels, right, to give all energy possible. Increasing blood glucose levels. And we're going to stimulate or secrete adrenaline and noradrenaline coming out of the adrenal gland. Now the other thing, I don't think it mentioned it here. The other part of the adrenal gland, if you can see this picture, let me see if I can blow that up. If you zoom in on the adrenal gland right here, notice the outside of the adrenal versus the inside. The inside kind of like the jelly inside of a donut. The outside being called the cortex, the inside being called the medulla. The adrenal medulla is where adrenaline and noradrenaline, which is epinephrine and norepinephrine, come from. The adrenal cortex, which is the outer shell, would be where cortisol comes from. So you've heard of cortisone or hydrocortisone? That's the medical version of our natural cortisol that's released in the body. So cortisol was released to help us manage stress. Cortisol is used to keep tissues tough, right? It's used all around the body to toughen us up. So you want this in short spurts, right, so your body can manage stress. But in long-term chronic secretion of cortisol, let's say you live stressed every day and you secrete cortisol all day long in high amounts, not a good thing. So long-term cortisol helps break the body tissues down, actually. Short-term cortisol helps to strengthen the body. The adrenal cortex, which is the outside shell of the adrenal gland. So talk to any doctor. Do they recommend any more than 4 cortisol injections a year? Or cortisone injections? No, right? Because it actually breaks down tissue, and it becomes an immune problem, actually. So cortisone is used very sparingly if the doctor is responsible. And the other thing about it is it works like a charm. It works beautifully. Help take away inflammation. But if you use it too much, it can actually break tissues down. So it's carefully prescribed, hopefully. All right. Let's play the game. This is sympathetic response. So you fill in the gaps. Where do we increase blood flow to? Extremities. Right. Everybody with me? Everybody worn out? Right, I know the feeling. Where do we decrease blood flow to? The GI tract, basically. Yeah, the organs, pretty much, yeah. What happens to blood glucose, up or down? Up, so we can draw an up arrow there to make it easy. Blood pressure? Up. Blood cortisol? Up. Cortisol, remember, is the stress hormone. It helps our body deal with stress. Pupils, dilate. Bronchi, dilate, get bigger. Right? We dilate the pupils so we can let as much light as possible to keep danger, right, in our vision, so we can always know what's going on. Which also plays off of cortisol and adrenaline. The more you see coming through your eyes, right, those kind of visual stimuli are going to affect immediately blood pressure and cortisol levels. It's amazing how fast the brain interprets vision and hearing as a danger signal. Yeah, okay, bronchi, we said dilate. Heart rate, increase. Bladder contraction would be decreased. And the reason behind this is anything to do with water, we want to conserve. Why would you want to conserve water? Because you never ever want to be, in a sense, dehydrated when you're in a sympathetic state. So we tend to hold more water if we're stressed, right? And that's a safety position that the body is taking. If it didn't care about water, if it just let yourself pee any given old time, right? Or kept producing saliva, which is a wasting of the water in a sense in this case, your blood pressure could drastically drop if you lost a lot of fluid. So the body goes through great lengths to keep blood pressure up. To put it plainly, and I'll say this pretty confidently, and it's not something you'll hear or read in a book, if you had a choice between high blood pressure or low blood pressure, the body is always going to choose high blood pressure. Low blood pressure is extremely unsafe. Your body will completely shut down. Whereas high blood pressure, it's not great to live with high blood pressure, but the body can manage with high blood pressure, right? So there are many more systems that you'll learn in AMP2 that will raise blood pressure. Not to the dysfunctional level, but blood pressure has to be managed, right, to where you keep blood pressure high or higher rather than lower. And that's what's called perfusion rate. If organs in general stop getting blood, they shut down. Whereas if they get too much blood pressure, they may be stressed, but they don't shut down. Right? Not for a while. They can take a lot of stress for a long time. But they get low blood pressure, they will shut down. So everything the body's going to do is to raise blood pressure to keep the body safe. Okay, so that's why we conserve water. Because without water, you have no plasma volume. If you lose too much water, you lose the water out of your blood, which decreases your plasma volume, which will lower blood pressure to a dangerous amount. So anything bladder would be always restricted. We don't want to lose water through the bladder. What about digestion? Right, it shuts off and inhibits, goes down. Talking parasympathetic flow, it's just the opposite. So where do we increase blood flow to? The GI tract, right? We decrease blood flow to arms and legs, right? Because we're not worried about fighting or flighting when we're resting and digesting, right? Blood glucose will be decreased because the glucose is now coming out of the blood back into the cells to rejuvenate, to make more ATP. Blood pressure decreased. Cortisol decreased. Pupils, you could say decreased or constricted. Really, it's just passively coming out of dilation, you could say. Bronchi, same thing, passively coming out of dilation, so we're constricting in a sense there. Not to the point of constricting like asthma, but constricting in a sense that it's just coming out of dilation, coming back to normal. Heart rate, decreased. Bladder is now increased. Now we can let go of water to manage acid, base, and acidic levels like that, and electrolyte levels. What about digestion? We increase digestion. So it's everything flip-flop from the sympathetic. Okay, and that's it. That's the most of the material I need you to know. The rest of it is just getting some details. There tends to be a dominance of sympathetic flow over anything that's parasympathetic because the body always wants to protect itself. And the biggest reason why that happens is here. Norepinephrine is broken down at a slower rate. So once you get all charged up, it takes a while for the body to come back down, physiologically. And that's for the sake of the body. But it goes without saying that you can see how it is equally important. You can't stay in sympathetic flow all day long. You've got to have some parasympathetic to balance it out, right? So sympathetic gets all the attention because it saves your life. But realize that parasympathetic pretty much more so saves your life because it's what rejuvenates your body. So it's very important. It's just kind of more in the background. We're going to skip over some of this stuff we've mentioned already. This is the same thing anatomically in this chart. Here's the picture of the sympathetic flow. We can see preganglionic neurons in the solid, postganglionic in the dotted lines. We see the two ganglia labeled here, paravertebral and prevertebral. Now let's talk about our three scenarios. Okay, so here's our three scenarios for sympathetic outflow, which would be called visceral motor, by the way. This whole chapter is not so much about sensory flow. If you've caught the drift of it, it's all about motor flow. There is a sensory flow coming, but we don't really talk about it. We're more concerned with visceral motor flow, so please know that. Visceral motor flow. And here's three choices. The axon can come to the ganglion and synapse at the same level. Number two, synapse at a different level in the sympathetic trunk. Or number three, pass completely through the sympathetic chain without synapsing. And then where would it synapse? At the prevertebral, right. Okay. So just be aware of those three scenarios. Synapsing at the same level in the sympathetic chain, at a different level. Or number three, not synapsing at all, and instead going to the prevertebral. And which organs are we serving if we synapse at the prevertebral ganglia? The lower ones, right? Yeah, the lower abdominal ones, right? Okay, we can skip all this. Here's our parasympathetic flow. Which ganglia we're using? They're called terminal because they're near or at the wall of the organ that they're serving. You're not responsible for all of these different ganglia. I just mentioned them because you will see them sometime later on. But just understand the word terminal ganglia belongs to the parasympathetic flow, and that we use these nerves right here, sacral nerves and cranial nerves. So that's all fair game. Okay, last up, our two terms I mentioned before, cholinergic, adrenergic. Remember, these can be used in two ways. Cholinergic describes a neuron using acetylcholine and a receptor being sensitive to acetylcholine. And an adrenergic, same way, except the difference is here, now it's sensitive to or using norepinephrine. So where we finish off with this, there's so much on this slide here. Realize all the specifics you're going to get more so in nursing school. But what I need you to know for this test is just knowing that the words nicotinic and muscarinic are two types of cholinergic receptors, which means they are sensitive to acetylcholine, right? Perfect. Whereas adrenergic receptors are called what? Alpha and beta. Alpha and beta. So the two adrenergic receptors are alpha and beta. The two cholinergic receptors are muscarinic and nicotinic. And that is it, guys. Chapter 14, done in a very fast review kind of a way. This is just a chart that I used to give to my patients to describe all the symptoms they could have with nerve root compression at any given level. That's not on the test, of course. It's just FYI. All right.